Tell us a little bit about what you saw and being able to relay that message to Cora when you watched Kimbrel pitch and kind of help out so he wasn't tipping his pitches.
So tipping pitches, we hear about it all the time.
People at home understand what tipping pitches is all about.
It's amazing.
And that's remarkable.
Alex, I'd like to share a little secret with the listeners. And with you, I guess. You don't know this.
Wow. A rarity.
Well, you kind of do know this.
Okay.
But the secret is that the business of podcasting is an imperfect science.
Mm-hmm.
Last week was our first episode, of our big what ifs with Grant Brisbee. We talked to him about what if Joan Kroc was able to give the San Diego Padres to the city of San Diego. He talked about what if Randy Johnson had actually signed with the Atlanta Braves when he was drafted out of high school by the Braves in the 1980s. And that whole episode, I was just calling them baseball's biggest what ifs because I hadn't thought of a better title, which was Baseball Butterfly Effects, which in my opinion sounds better and is more memorable and is catchier. And so, do you know what I did? I just changed the title before it went live. I just
that's your prerogative,
without signaling that that's what I was going to call it in the episode at all, and calling it a different thing many times in the episode. I just changed it because you know what? We make the rules.
We do.
We follow a standard that only we can set. And I suppose the Tipping Pitches patrons, if they really hated Baseball Butterfly Effects, we would go back to Baseball What Ifs. But
right. Well, luckily we don't have to deal with that too much longer because today is the final episode of Baseball Butterfly Effects.
Well, the final for now, I guess. We
Yes.
could keep this idea rolling.
Absolutely.
If more people hear it and want to come and share their Baseball Butterfly Effect, or maybe if the Tipping Pitches patrons or just Tipping Pitches listeners want to call into our voicemail or email us and let us know who they would want us to talk to as part of this ongoing series. It doesn't have to be over, you know? We could keep it going. Keep the good vibes flowing.
I encourage those in our Slack and on Twitter to drop your favorite what if to ponder. Because y'all have such hyper specific knowledge about your teams that I clearly am just not privy to. So I want to know what instance would have impacted the direction of your franchise. Let us know.
Yes, please feel free to share your baseball what ifs. Maybe as part
Your
of the
butterfly
mail.
effects, you mean?
Oh God! See. The person, the Bobby who's writing the copy of the episodes. Whenever I do that on occasion, when I'm writing it well ahead of time, and I don't get your copy, or just the Bobby who's thinking about podcast ideas in the future is much better than the Bobby who's actually sitting down to record them in almost all instances. Yes, please feel free to share your butterfly effects about baseball or the wider world. You know, I'll read your butterfly effects.
It doesn't have to
anything.
be about baseball. Yeah.
We have another Baseball Butterfly Effects episode queued up and ready to go for you coming up just shortly with Janice Scurio, the wonderful writer at many different places, including Sports Illustrated, Baseball Prospectus, Southside Sox, NBC. We're really excited to hear what she has queued up for us. I'm also excited, Alex, to hear what you have queued up for us. But before we can do that, I have to give a shout out to the new patrons from the last 2 weeks. Since last time we were recording so far ahead of time, I wasn't able to shout those people out. So thank you to Jack, Lauren, Callum, Kyle, and John. Do you want to, before the cold open here, Alex, before the cold open is done here, Alex, do you want to talk about what the fuck is going on with Carlos Correa at all? Or should we just pretend that that's not happening?
I don't know.
By the time people are listening to this, Carlos Correa could have a 12-year, $315 million contract with the Doosan Bears. I don't know. He might not be playing third base for the New York Mets next year. Who knows?
Cash in that good Doosan check. Oh my God.
I'm just pretending that none of this ever happened because I've been pretty offline for the last few days or so, or weekish since our last episode with Grant Brisbee, mostly because of the holidays and because of travel and all of that sort of thing. So I'm not really following this Carlos Correa story at all. I'm into not. There's not really anything to follow.
Luckily, yeah, there's nothing to follow. We got the news about the holdup like last week.
Ken Rosenthal lives
Coming
for
through.
the drama,
Mhm.
loves the mess. Are you aware of the fact that Carlos Correa's last name is actually Oppenheimer? That's actually true. That's not a joke.
No, I know.
A bit.
I think I learned that years ago and then proceeded to wipe it from my brain just because I couldn't really process that.
Carlos Javier Correa Oppenheimer Jr.
Carlos Oppenheimer.
What's going on there? That's not a name you hear every day.
No, it's not. You hear it in certain places.
Do you? Like Christopher Nolan films? Like what is happening there? Is he going to be in the Christopher Nolan film Oppenheimer? Is it actually about him signing with the New York Mets? That's what Christopher Nolan's 2023 blockbuster film Oppenheimer is going to be about. The last 2 weeks of Carlos Correa's life.
That certainly would be one bomb you could drop on New York.
It's very powerful. It's very man will not understand it until he sees it in action. Okay. Why don't we just bring in Janice before this goes in a direction that neither of us nor the listeners want it to go in? We're going to do part 2 of Baseball Butterfly Effects, but before we do, I am Bobby Wagner.
I'm Alex Baisley.
And you are listening to Tipping Pitches. Baseball Butterfly Effects Part 2, which we are calling this now, even though I didn't call it that last week, but I thought of a better title and changed the title on everybody. So Baseball Butterfly Effects Part 2, we are lucky to be joined by Janice Scurio, White Sox writer, multi-utility player at CHGO Sports. Janice, hello, welcome to the show.
Hello, guys. Thanks for having me on.
It's so nice to have you here. So you're here as part of our Baseball Butterfly Effects. We reached out to you and asked if you would want to participate in this. Baseball's biggest what ifs, alternate realities, alternate universes. If one thing changed, what would have resulted from that? So we posed this question to you, and you were excited to jump all over it, to share a White Sox related thing. But I think one that not a lot of people know that much about, but definitely checks a lot of Tipping Pitches boxes. So why don't you lay out your what if, and then we can sort of pry into it and dig a little bit deeper and find out how different the world would have been had this gone differently.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start backwards. So when I was researching this topic, this is something that has been in the back of my mind for forever. And it happened when I was very young. So it is something that I don't consciously remember. It's talked about a little bit in circles. But for the most part, when I was doing my research, I went on eBay and I typed in the phrase Florida White Sox. And so what came up was a series of very ugly hats and shirts. So that is probably my least favorite part of this what if, is that if this actually happened, we'd get just a barrage of very ugly merch.
Oh, God. I looked up the logo. It really is very ugly.
So it's really bad.
It's absolutely terrible. I think one of the hats is a trucker hat, which, of course, was the norm in the 1980s, late 1980s. But yeah, it's just Florida. And of course, 2 very creative graphic design. The letter F is in the shape of the state of Florida. I know.
Clever.
I think the rapper Flo Rida appropriated that as well for his logo. So good on him for doing that.
He's got some hits, though. I was spinning right round in middle school.
As was I, as was everybody. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of this merchandise is just absolutely hideous. The colors, it looks like they were going to go with a green and orange motif. And I don't know. I really don't want to offend any people who may be fans of sports teams who use green and orange, but I'm sorry, it's ugly. It just does not go good together. But yeah, essentially what happened here in 1988, there was a threat, and I call it a threat very loosely, that the Chicago White Sox were going to move to St. Petersburg, Florida. But some last-minute legislating saved the team from making that move. So no one at the time properly called Jerry Reinsdorf's bluff. For those of you keeping score at home, Jerry Reinsdorf is the owner of the Chicago White Sox, still is to this day, to the chagrin of many White Sox fans who may be listening to this. Yeah, in the 1980s, to give you guys some background, Tampa Bay was actually very desperate to bring the first Major League Baseball team to Florida. So the team, or the stadium that we now know as Tropicana Field, was originally called the Florida Suncoast Dome, which is just a very
Probably a bank.
interesting name.
It's probably a bank, honestly. Like, it's one of those things that sounds like it's not a bank, but Florida Suncoast Bank is probably a bank. You know, like Great American Ballpark, bank. Sounds like it's not a bank, but it's a bank.
It's either that or like a pop punk band, you know, Florida Suncoast, man. That's just like me and my friends, you know, just hanging out eating pizza.
So I think you guys are around my age, right? You're in your 30s, 30-ish kind of. Do you guys remember Suncoast Video, the store in the mall? I just thought of this when I was.
I do not, because we are actually in our mid-20s,
Oh,
so we're a little bit
sorry.
behind. No, that's quite all right. We wear it poorly, so some people think we're in our 30s and 40s.
Other people think we're in our teens, so cuts both ways.
Right. I was mainly going more off wisdom rather than appearance.
I like it. That was a good save. Nice.
Thank you. Suncoast Video, just a relic from the mall age of the late 80s, early 90s, kind of along the same lines of, Sam Goody, trying to think of any stores that were kind of along the lines. This is completely just not making any sense to you. That's totally fine. But anyway.
No, this is crucial context, honestly.
Absolutely. But anyway, Tropicana Field, originally the Florida Suncoast Dome, was used in an attempt to entice the Chicago White Sox to relocate if a new ballpark was not built to replace the aging Comiskey Park. And so the Comiskey Park that we know to this day now has gone through several name facelifts. Now it's called Guaranteed Rate Field. Before then, it was called U.S. Cellular Field. But its first name, the new ballpark, was a new Comiskey Park. So old Comiskey Park was essentially right across the street from the new ballpark. It was just completely dilapidated. Concrete was falling down. It was in shambles. It was very obvious that the White Sox needed a new ballpark. So that was one of the reasons. And of course, too, in the late 1980s, the Cubs were more popular. And that might hold true to this day. But the main reason why the Cubs were more popular was definitely because of broadcasting rights. So Cubs games were viewed for free on WGN, which was a nationwide channel. And that also explains why there are plenty of Cubs fans around the country, just mainly because due to WGN. So in Tampa Bay, the White Sox would have been able to make at least $1 million more in broadcast rights per year. And in 1988 dollars, that's quite a lot of money. So at the time, only 34% of Chicagoans had cable TV, which I thought was very interesting, and were able to watch the White Sox at home. So essentially, the broadcasting deal was one of the carrots that Tampa Bay was holding up to bring the White Sox to Florida. Essentially, Jerry Reinsdorf thought that this was very attractive and definitely just started telling Illinois lawmakers, hey, look, if I do not get funds for this stadium, I am packing up and leaving the city of Chicago and leaving for more sunnier territories. So that essentially was the landscape back in the late 1980s.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Exactly.
This story could be from yesterday, you know?
Exactly.
This story is basically like if Las Vegas had already built a stadium and was trying to coax the A's to come there. Like, this is like, it's so similar to, and it's like such a blueprint for how baseball owners and the league really operates, because the league has to give sort of approval, or like tacit approval to a franchise to threaten to leave a city, to leave a market, to open a new market, because that has to be approved by the rest of the owners. And so this comes with the full force of the league behind it. Comiskey Park, the original Comiskey Park, was built in 1910. So by 1988, it's 78 years old, and that's a rough 78 years. That's a two world wars, 78 years in there. And so it's like they definitely need a new park, right? And of course, Jerry Reinsdorf, I mean, you can speak to this even more than us. Jerry Reinsdorf doesn't want to pay for anything. He doesn't want to pay for the White Sox. He doesn't want to pay for the 1990s Chicago Bulls to stay together, let alone for the White Sox to build their own new stadium. And so I'm curious what you think, aside from the obvious of the White Sox being in Florida, like how much in the baseball world do you think is different? Obviously, we don't get the Tampa Bay Rays. We don't get them as an expansion franchise. So there are so many different ways that this can go. But what do you think is the biggest difference in 2022?
I think the biggest difference, definitely, and I actually kind of did a what if, like a what if Reinsdorf wasn't bluffing? What if Governor James Thompson looked the other way and was like, "Nah, I am not giving you millions of dollars in public funds to build a stadium." So essentially, I predicted that relocation would be back on the table for the Florida White Sox in 2022. I would predict that they would probably have the league's one of the league's worst team attendance, even though, maybe they would have made the postseason once or twice, just kind of gauging from what the Rays have done. So with plans for a new park in Montreal kind of slipping through, a new contender would step up. So I would predict that perhaps, again, I'm kind of going along the lines of, hey, let's use millions of dollars in public funds again. The White Sox rightfully returned to their home on the south side of Chicago at 35th and Shields in 2022, with a new ballpark to be built across the street where the old stadium was 30 plus years ago. So the one thing that I also thought about is, all right, so if, say, the stadium was demolished, if the team moved, what would be a good use case for the land? And of course, the first thing that came to my mind are condos. It would probably just be nothing but condos in that area.
Yep.
So I actually do live in the neighborhood. I live not too far away from the ballpark. So Bridgeport is the name of the neighborhood. I wouldn't say it's entirely gentrified, but it's definitely heading in that direction. So we have seen condos kind of spring up within the last 10 years, a lot of trendier restaurants, a lot of, people my age and younger moving in, young professionals. So, I would imagine that the neighborhood would probably still progress in that direction. So, we'd probably see plenty of condos. We definitely see maybe a lot of mixed use case scenarios. Perhaps the urbanist nightmare of just having a bunch of condos with like a Chipotle down at the very bottom, probably something along those lines. I think I would predict that the White Sox would eventually move back to Chicago. I'm not exactly sure how or why, but it would be something that I would like to see in my future simulation.
I love that. I love how you having built out like the dominoes that would fall. I mean, it'd be interesting because that would be kind of you would think a moratorium on baseball in that part of Florida, right? The Major League Baseball is not going to move a team there, then move one out, and then cycle another one in, right? You would think that they would realize the writing on the wall, and say this is not a place for baseball. So even in that sense, now as Major League Baseball does kind of look at relocating teams or expanding teams, whatnot, you probably have a couple teams in different spots around the country, right? I know North Carolina was kind of a popular option at the time, as well as the usual suspects. But the face of baseball looks very different, even if the White Sox end up back in Chicago at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought a lot about the threat. I keep using that word because it's the first thing that comes to mind. It's very threatening. We're going to take your baseball team away if you don't give us money.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a shakedown.
Yeah, exactly. It's a shakedown. I definitely thought a lot about the split plan for the Rays to split their home schedule between Florida and Montreal, and it's just kind of a terrible idea all around. Considering you've got the players who have to consider moving their families between two countries, actually, which makes it even more difficult. And you're also dealing with different currencies. You're also dealing with a bunch of other factors as well. So I thought about that. I'm actually kind of glad that owners rejected that proposal, because it's just, I don't know, logistically, it just seems absolutely terrible. I mean, as much as I would also just love to see a major league team return to Montreal, I love that city, and I do miss the Expos. I remember a sliver of what the Expos were like.
Yeah.
But yeah, this just was not it.
What do you think White Sox fandom looks like if they move to Florida? Because I think a majority, if not most, of the fans would probably not follow their fandom to Florida. I think that's the case for a lot of teams. Now, it's not like if you use the NBA as an example, the Oklahoma City Thunder were relocated from Seattle as the Supersonics, and the Thunder just changed everything about their team. It was new ownership. It was, a new team name, a new logo. It's basically a different franchise entirely, though it is considered the same like legal entity, I suppose. But for the White Sox, they were going to keep their name. They were, I imagine, going to keep their same owner, unless Jerry Reinsdorf was going to turn around and sell the team not that long after that. And so, which is a definite possibility. And I wonder what you think about that too, as to whether Jerry Reinsdorf would have kept the team or not after moving it to Florida, or if he would have just used it as an opportunity to cash in. But do you think that they would have, like, for yourself, would you have remained a White Sox fan?
This is a question that has been posed to White Sox Twitter several times, actually. And that's a pretty great question. I think it all depends on where they go, really. So I think probably my first knee-jerk reaction would probably to just support the closest, or at least the physically closest team to me. And for me, I mean, the Cubs are definitely not going to be an option. So the Milwaukee Brewers would definitely be, they would win my loyalties.
It's 2022. The White Sox are still in Chicago, and obviously they're still kind of teetering on this. Are they a big market team? Are they not? Right? It kind of depends on the flavor of the day for Jerry. But that does change significantly if they move to Tampa Bay, right? Where we know that the market is very different. It's hard to build a baseball team that people actually want to come see there, at least in St. Petersburg. And so there does feel like a very real possibility that they move to Florida. Things don't go as planned, and Jerry Reinsdorf decides to cash out, right?
Yeah. I think one really interesting thing that I came across during my research is that a lot of people think that it was certainly just a bluff. And so I pulled up this article from Cigar Aficionado. Yeah, I know. Jerry Reinsdorf did an interview with Cigar Aficionado back in 1995. Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And he said this. A savvy negotiator creates leverage. People had to think we were going to leave Chicago.
Nice.
See, okay. I this is why I really like this hypothetical, because it allows you a very clear and obvious window into the mindset of an owner. Like, if you think about it from the outside, why would Jerry Reinsdorf take the Chicago White Sox, a storied franchise that has such strong ties to the south side of Chicago and a loyal and vibrant fan base that has stuck with the team throughout all of the bullshit that he has been a large part in putting them through, and move them to Florida, where it's just a complete unknown, unless he like cared a lot about the team, which is up for debate, sort of. And then therefore he would not really be able to sell the team in Florida too, because you don't really know how much that team is worth if you move it right after that, because you don't have a built-in fan base. Like, you're not sure what the long-term prospects of a team in Florida are going to look like. Like, Florida was, I think, much more ripe for an expansion team, which is why it got two expansion teams in the Marlins and the Rays, and versus moving a team there, especially with an owner who's not motivated to like stick it out for the long haul. So I don't know. I remain so skeptical of all of these different owners who say, oh, well, we might up and move the team to Las Vegas, or like we might move the team to wherever, Montreal, or wherever these other cities that want a team so bad, because it seems really hard. Like, it seems like hard work, and most of these owners don't really want to put in hard work, especially someone like John Fisher with the A's or Jerry Reinsdorf with the White Sox. Like, he has not wanted to put in the work to make it a sustainable winner and, model franchise, so to speak.
He absolutely was not willing to put any of the work in, and definitely was not willing to put in any of the money too. So I do want to talk a little bit about James Thompson. So he was the Illinois governor at the time. How he managed to pull this through. So June 30th, 1988, that was the last day of the legislative session. So essentially, he got enough votes for the General Assembly to approve this tax subsidized $167 million Sox stadium. And the bill passed at 12:03 a.m. So what's funny here is that 3 minutes later, 3 minutes earlier, there was a Florida TV station saying that, hey, that's it. The Sox are going to Florida. So everyone in St. Petersburg thought that the deal was done and set in stone. But that wasn't the case. James Thompson came through like literally with the buzzer beater and approved the funds. So yeah, that is the short story of how Jerry Reinsdorf got $167 million in public funds to get the White Sox a new stadium. And so I think about this a lot in the sense that, all right, so public funds were used to build the stadium, but the way the stadium operates to this day kind of makes me a little ill in the sense that, so Guaranteed Rate Field is one of the only major league ballparks. If you hold a ticket for the 500 level, you cannot go to other areas of the ballpark. So essentially, if you're in the cheap seats, you're a peasant that stays up there the entire game. There is no roaming. You cannot go down to the 100 level. A lot of the fan experiences that they came out with in the past, like 5-10 years, inaccessible to people who buy tickets for the 500 level. And so, I don't know, it seems a little ass backwards when you think that, yeah, in a stadium that was built with public funds, White Sox fans are very working class for the most part. That's a generalization, but it is true. White Sox fans are meant to be, or at least they have a reputation for being very blue collar, kind of working class. Kind of like the everyman or every person, I guess I should say. If you buy a ticket for that 500 level, you can't go down. It's complete bullshit.
I completely didn't know that.
Yeah.
Me either. Doesn't it just make sense though, with like all the other stuff that this ownership group does? Like, doesn't it just make sense that they would have that policy? I'm thinking about any silver lining that we could have to the Florida White Sox. And here's what I'm coming up with. Here's the only thing I'm coming up with. We don't have the Rays. Therefore, we don't have to deal with every couple months a discourse cycle about how the Rays are actually the best run team in baseball and how spending only $80 million on payroll was actually a good thing, and never extending guys and never paying guys what they're worth in free agency is actually the only way to build a team. That's the only silver lining I can come up with, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, too, if you trade with the Rays, there is something that is afoot. There is always something afoot that if you make a trade with the Rays, the Rays have something just right underneath just the surface there that they are plotting. So yeah, that is the silver lining there, that we no longer have to deal with that insidiousness.
I'm curious who then becomes the Rays, right? Because it's not like the people who would go to the Rays then just disappear from baseball, right? Eric Neander ends up somewhere else. Chaim Bloom ends up somewhere else.
Yeah, that is a really great question. I feel as if someone will have to fulfill that role, that someone will have to be the Rays. It's not going to be the White Sox.
Do the Marlins, that ultimate expansion team, become the Tampa Bay Rays?
Wow. Okay.
I think maybe it's the Diamondbacks, perhaps.
The Diamondbacks.
Here's a thought: the Rockies. The Rockies are the new Rays.
Oh my!
We've moved into nightmare territory.
Can you imagine the Rockies with the Rays brain trust, with the built-in advantage of playing your games at home in quarters? Like being able to use that in building a good team around it. Wow, I love it. I love the concept.
My gosh. Yeah, you need to reset the simulation here.
Yes. We've reached our peak in butterfly effects. So Janice, thank you so much. That was excellent. Now, Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your baseball butterfly effect with us.
I'm glad, because mine ties in relatively neatly with a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about, and it actually has implications on teams like the Marlins and the Diamondbacks and the Expos and beyond. And that was Major League Baseball's proposal and near plan to contract the Expos and the Twins in 2001.
Yeah.
This is because it didn't happen, I feel like it gets kind of overlooked, but it could have ended up being one of the most pivotal kind of moments in baseball history.
I can't believe we don't talk about this more, honestly.
I know.
Given what the subject matter of our show.
Right. So, I mean, just a little bit of background, right? It's 2001. The Twins and the Expos are kind of in dire straits. Their payrolls are ranking near the bottom of the league consistently, and their teams aren't performing very well. And the Twins, the Metrodome is just a mess. As far as the Expos go, Jeffrey Loria is trying to get out. No teams are coming. No fans are coming to the games. The stadium is a mess. The local government doesn't give a shit. Like it's bad news over there. And Bud Selig and the rest of the owners say the league is in really bad economic conditions right now. These two teams are facing the worst of it. We can't have teams that are running out payrolls like that every day. It's anti-competitive. We can't have that. We got to get rid of them. And the owners actually vote to do it 28-2 on November 6th, 2001. Obviously, the two dissenting teams were the Expos and the Twins, which doesn't really count.
Honestly, though, there are some owners in baseball today who I think would vote yes to being contracted. Like if they were going to get a payout for it.
No, both Jim Polad and Jeffrey Loria were probably the two biggest boosters for this, because they were each going to get about $250 million for their troubles. So like they would have been good. This ends up not happening because there's like a Minnesota like sports stadium commission, whatever, that says the Twins, you have another year left on your lease. You have to play it out. A local judge issues a temporary restraining order, basically, and says the Twins do have to complete their lease here at the Metrodome. And by that time, which is like in late 2002, that gets all wrapped up, there's a new CBA in place. The owners have agreed they're not going to try and contract any teams, at least for the next few years. And the idea is dead in the water, but it kind of belies how close this actually came to happening, which is to say really, really close. And the implications would have been really, really far reaching. So it would have been, let's contract the Expos and Twins, move the Arizona Diamondbacks, who just won the World Series, to the AL West, move the Rangers from the AL West to the AL Central, move the Pirates from the NL Central to the NL East. I hope you guys are keeping track of all this. It's very straightforward.
Yeah. Pirates in the NL East. That's 17 guaranteed wins for the Mets every year. I like it.
Jeffrey Loria would have still taken over the Marlins from incumbent owner John Henry. He would have been able to take a few players with him, like, say, Vladimir Guerrero. John Henry would have assumed ownership over the Angels and taken a similar number of players with him. Oh, my
God. Oh, that's the one that really just broke my brain.
Right? Like,
this is a lot. I've got like a beautiful mind board. Like
right, exactly. Like thinking about, so there's no John Henry Red Sox, right? Vladimir Guerrero goes down in history as a Miami Marlin.
I love that.
There's no.
He feels kind of Marlins-esque, to be honest.
He does, honestly. He has it. I mean, I feel like the Expos and Marlins kind of soul sisters there. Things look very different. I'm curious to hear your guys' sort of knee-jerk reactions to what would have been a very simple transition period back in 2001.
I think the whole realignment of the divisions is probably like one of the things that I'm just thinking would definitely affect present day baseball and just how we view it and how we think of it.
Yeah.
I'm honestly just thinking more about the Diamondbacks in the AL West. Like what the hell?
Yeah.
They do feel like a very NL team.
They do. They absolutely do.
I don't want to like overstate things here, but I think that this is like the biggest baseball what if in the last 30 years, because I guess maybe what if the strike didn't happen is bigger than this, but like that's like 30 what ifs rolled into one. Like,
Right,
that almost feels
exactly.
like cheating. Like, what if we just made the strike go away? It doesn't. That's sort of like a Deus ex machina kind of, like, it's not really interesting for conversation. I think this is really interesting because if you take two teams away, I feel like that kills your league. Like, I feel like MLB does not recover from that. Certainly not in the way that we saw them recover by keeping the team. So 2002, it's a weird time for the league. It's post steroid boom and post people finding out about the rumors about steroids. So those are like starting to really creep in. Like late 90s is when people are like, oh, okay, everybody's hitting a bunch of home run chases. No one's talking about steroids. And then as we roll into the 2000s, early 2000s, we have lowering viewership numbers still carrying over from the strike in some places. And we don't have teams diversifying income streams in the same way that we do in the late 2000s and particularly in the 2010s and into the 2020s. And so if you contract two teams, I almost feel like baseball is it's not ruined as a commodity in the United States, but it's certainly devalued as a commodity in the United States. We don't get like the same increase in team franchise values. We don't get the same desire to own these teams as an asset. And maybe that is ultimately good in the long run for the sport if we have like a reckoning about what the financial state of baseball is in 2002, like a serious hard reckoning. We hit the rock bottom of what this situation is. But most of the time when we have like financial reckonings in the United States, it doesn't result in good things. It just results in somehow rich people getting richer. And so I think that like the league is completely different if we look back on it now. We don't have like the financial health in smaller markets, which I think is honestly better for the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you're right that like this very much was a labor issue as much as a baseball issue, right? The league was contending with waning attendance stemming from the 94 strike. They claimed that revenues were in the toilet, although as it turned out, Bud Selig was not being entirely truthful about that. That's new.
No.
Right. But there was the expectation that the players were not going to let this happen without a fight, right? The owners wanted some sort of leverage over the players after the strike had kind of given them more power. And so they said, we're going to force them to the table by basically eliminating 50 jobs and bringing it along with steroid testing and increased revenue sharing and luxury tax and all these sorts of things. And it was a real political risk for them because you thought one work stoppage was bad. Try a second within the same decade. Like the sport very well maybe doesn't recover from that. Right. And I think that neither side really wanted it to get that far, but they kind of got really lucky they didn't have to make that call. And it was just a Minnesota judge who kind of said, yeah, you guys got to stay here for the next year. And by that time, they'd figured out a solution. But it's interesting to think about if it hadn't gotten to that point, I really do wonder kind of what the state of baseball even is in 2022, if it exists kind of at all.
I think it's absolutely wild that it just took a judge to say nah, and it just completely kind of changed the course of baseball history. That is wild to me, because it just seems so inconsequential and so small, right? And then you see that, oh no, it is a decision that has a lot of just like drastic impact.
Yeah, that's Hennepin County Judge Harry Seymour Crump to you all. Remember the name.
New Tipping Pitches logo with Harry Seymour Crump's face instead of.
That's right. I'm getting my custom jersey made right now.
The likeness of Ricky Henderson, maybe inspired by Ricky Henderson. This is so interesting because 4 years later, the Twins get a new ballpark, and that's part of their sort of revitalization, right? And the new ballpark costs just a little bit over $500 million. The Twins only contribute $135 million of their own money to that. So this is basically like 80% funded by public funds. And I do feel like that drastic threat and that much of a show about markets not being able to support baseball teams, which is this sort of nebulous concept. Like, what does it mean for a market to be able to support a baseball team? There are small markets that thrive, and there are big markets that are not as successful in terms of getting people to actually come out to baseball games. Big markets in terms of like the amount of people who live in a place. And it does feel like the beginning of a game plan for ownership in terms of how to leverage their importance in the community into direct financial benefit. And so, to tie it back to your point, Janice, to tie it back to your butterfly effect, this is like the logical outcome of the Reinsdorf threat in the late 1980s is what's one step further than this? We'll just take the team away entirely. There won't even be a team anymore. And so they feel very of a piece. And we didn't even know that Alex was going to choose this. So it's funny that they tie together in this way.
Yeah, it seems very punitive. It's just sort of like, I don't know. It's like when you're talking to your dog and the dog is not like behaving and you're just like, well, I'm just going to take this toy away. Like now you're never going to have a toy. How do you feel about that? I don't know. It just seems like the way the owners like treat these markets, it's just sort of like, oh, well, you just have to appreciate what you have then.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea that it's also the cities that get punished, right? The owners are sitting pretty. They get to cash out and make a return on their investment. Even though they ran a business into the ground, you still get that $250 million check and the city is left with jack shit.
Let's make this about ourselves real quick, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
What would doing a podcast in the 2000s been? What would doing a podcast about baseball ownership and the financial structure of the game have been like in the 2000s? Shit was popping off left and right. It was like, all right, John Henry just sold the Marlins. Now John Henry's buying the Red Sox. Now we're getting rid of the fucking Twins. Goodbye, Twins. Now we're getting rid of the Expos. Oh, now Jerry Reinsdorf wants to move the team. He needs a new stadium. He's got to move the team. Like, we don't have that much instability in baseball anymore. All things considered, baseball ownership is in a relatively stable place if you place it in the context of its history. And I think that's weird too, because this not contracting the league almost like set baseball ownership up to be more stable. Because if they had contracted the league, I don't know. I feel like anything's on the table.
Yeah, no, totally. Also, I feel like if we are doing that in the early 2000s, there are far more people telling us to just shut the fuck up and watch Barry Bonds, which would be a fair criticism if we're being quite honest.
No, we could have been trailblazers that nobody listened to, but we were trailblazers.
The thing you mentioned making it about ourselves, so I'll make it about myself. If the Diamondbacks move to the AL West, and if John Henry takes over the Angels and brings over some of his successful players from Marlins, I don't think there's a Moneyball A's because they have to contend with the defending world champions at this point, a slightly strengthened Angels team, and things look maybe very, very different. If that 2002 team does not go on its sort of historic run, does Moneyball the book get written?
Ooh.
Does the idea of Moneyball proliferate sort of in the way it has? I mean, obviously, these ideas were around far before the book was actually written. Bill James was already established, and these ideas were already taken hold. But the A's, I feel like, gave like a shape and like a voice to it that I don't know would have existed otherwise.
That's my goodness. Oof.
Is that our? Did we
That's
just
the
find,
proper response to that? I think.
Did we just find our silver lining that Bill James is not on Twitter? If we get rid of the Twins, then Bill James never makes a Twitter account.
I feel as if that's a fair sacrifice.
I think so. Yeah.
Sorry to the Twins fans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible lack of content. Sorry.
Anything else to say on the Twins almost being contracted?
The last thing I'll say.
Sorry, the Twins and the Expos. I don't want to short shrift the Expos. It's just that they don't exist anymore. So it's
I know. Yeah. The last thing I'll say because we mentioned the Colorado Rockies potentially being the Rays in Janice's scenario, and I will note that at the time of this proposal, Rockies chair Jerry McMorris said, "I just didn't understand why we continued to spread the money to places that continuously showed they don't have the type of support you need for baseball to survive," which is a very rich thing for someone who runs the Colorado Rockies to say.
For as much as we clown on the Rockies, they actually get people to come to games.
They
are always at the top of the league in attendance every year, and they're like one of the franchises that relies on cable deals less than other franchises. So maybe they're doing something right. Maybe we could afford to have a few more Rockies out there in the world.
Turns out all you need is a stadium in the middle of the wilderness that looks out onto the mountains.
Yeah. Well, it's in downtown Denver. It's a real city. Okay. Janice Scurio, thank you so much for joining us for our part 2 of Baseball Butterfly Effects. Can you please let the listeners of the Tipping Pitches podcast know where they can follow you, find your work, get more of you in their life?
Absolutely. If you decide to go down that route, you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Scuriosa, spelled Scuriosa. I'm realizing now that it's perhaps one of the most inaccessible Twitter handles. It is just a vast bastardization of my last name. A lot of people think my last name is Scuriosa. It is not.
Yes, Alex and I thought that all the way up until double checking before the pod and seeing your LinkedIn, but I'm glad that I didn't mess that up.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, I already have a large digital footprint, but like strangely enough, it is my Twitter handle that is somehow causing this barrier. And I don't know why I'm talking about it. I did it to myself. So I don't know, maybe I'll workshop a better Twitter handle in the future. But anyway, you can find me and all my work there. I currently drop in the CHGO White Sox pod from time to time, basically just dishing out all of my hot Leary Garcia takes. So catch me on there.
Janice Scurio, we had a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me on. Very honored to have graced Tipping Pitches. So thank you.
Every second a collective heart breaks. All together, every single head shakes. Shut
All
your
right.
eyes
Thank you to
when
Janice.
you
Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to you, Alex, for sharing your baseball butterfly effect, which at time of recording this outro, I don't know what it is yet because we're recording this outro before we record the actual podcast, and you're live revealing it to me on the podcast. So now that we've sufficiently confused everybody with the timeline of how this podcast was recorded,
ourselves included,
and we made Christopher Nolan jokes to start the podcast out, I think everybody's in the right headspace to just end the podcast in a daze.
You mean like this episode or period? Like this was it?
Well, I told you that I was going to continue to make the joke, this is our last episode,
right,
to see if people enjoyed that bit. But like a week later now, I don't even think it's a good bit. It's not even good enough to keep going. It's not even good as ground ball to Joe Panic. That bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen how the A's doing the same thing to their fans like every couple years for 2 decades has turned out. So we could head down that path.
Oh my God,
I just don't know how it
A's
would turn out for us.
We didn't even talk about Liberty Media. We didn't even talk about the Braves extending Sean Murphy for under market value. We didn't even make fun of all of the writers saying, "Oh, I'd rather have Sean Murphy at this price than JT Realmuto." So much unmined content.
That's what the holidays are for. We need time off from this.
Right.
I was actually on a plane when the Sean Murphy news broke, so I got all the alerts when I got off, which was such a blessing to just avoid Braves discourse for like 6 hours.
Well, it's still going. So if you want to tune back in and get your fill, now's the time. There's no time like the present.
That's true. It's on your local channel every night at 7 p.m.
Murder and carjacking in the city. Braves extend young star for under market value. More at 11.
Should we wrap this up and get out of here?
Yes, let's do that. Thank you to everybody who has signed up for the Patreon. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to everybody for all of the wonderful support in 2022. This is our first episode of 2023, which I hope is an exciting year full of twists and turns, all of which are good for us, none of which are bad for us. That's what I hope as we head into the new year.
Once again, I'm just hoping for a collective bargaining agreement. That's my one New Year's wish.
Do you think like after a full year you can start like a campaign? You know, like you can start a change.org petition. 1 year removed from the tentative agreement to the CBA. We need to demand accountability.
Something tells me that wouldn't really pick up much traction these days. I feel like once the CBA was negotiated, fans were like, okay, cool. I now don't have to think about that again for 5 years, which is fair. That's a fair reaction to that. But anyway, you and I would be able to add our names.
More people should put CBAs on their reading lists. Like, here's all the books here's my favorite books from 2022. The Major League Baseball CBA.
CBA. Wow, you sound fun at parties.
I am fun at parties. Please invite me to your party. I'll have a great time.
It's like it's the meme where the guy's standing in the corner, right? Like they don't know that
I read the entire MLB PA CBA.
Exactly. That owners are exploiting the players to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
They don't know that the CBT could have been so much higher.
Right. Everyone else is like, no, we know. We just it doesn't matter to us.
If there's
Sorry,
one thing that I actually don't talk about at parties, it's baseball. Because I'm not at parties where people know anything about baseball. I am more often at parties where people are like, haha, you like baseball? Weird. Alex and I are not like crushing it with the lefty baseball Brooklyn community. You know, most of our friends don't know anything about baseball.
I know. Well, and now we lost the one storyline that like kind of broke through to the wider public, right? People are like, oh, contract? And you could be like, no, not yet. And now
I think the Mets can break through to the wider public. I have faith. I have faith in people thinking critically about Steve Cohen.
All led by Carlos Correa. Call that the Queen's Project.
Exactly. Thank you to everybody for listening. We will be back next week.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Rodriguez. Tipping pitches.
Tipping pitches.
This is the one that I love the most.
Tipping pitches.
So we'll see you next week. See ya!